mean, I can sit there. It's going to be hard to do it like this.
Well, it's going to be like this. Like I eat a celery.
Should I be there?
Just all sit like this. Stare at each other. We're like a...
Do-up.
Yeah.
Do-do-do.
This is Tubalon Detector with Jacek Golański. Season 1. Winter in California.
Tubalon detected.
Hi guys, would you like to say who you are and where are we?
I'm Adam.
My name is Lowell. I'm Adam's husband.
And I'm Luke, and we all live together in the same house in San Francisco, near Castro, if you know San Francisco, California, United States. I've known Lowell for maybe 13 or 14 years. I met him my freshman year of college. We've been best friends ever since. We lived together for 3 years in college, 1 year in New York, and 3 years in San Francisco. I have lived with Adam for 3 years in San Francisco. So we've all lived together for 3 years now. And we are a little family.
There is one more mammal living here, and I had quite some interactions with him, and he's a very nice mammal. Who's that?
So the mammal is our dog Moses, who is 4 years old. Well, Lowell and I got him in October of 2014. So he's a little over 4 years old. Lowell and I have been dating for almost 10 years, and we got married about a year and a half ago. We've been dating for 9 years, but we've been living together on and off for about 8 of those years.
Moses is our first son.
What dictionary would say is that friend in Polish is przyjaciel, but I think the understanding of those terms is much different. So if you could explain what does it mean for you, friend?
I would say Luke and Adam are two of my 3 closest friends. Friend for me is...
Who's the other one?
Sarah.
Oh, yeah.
I think a friend is like someone who is close to you throughout your life, no matter where you are or what you're doing. I think that's how I think about a close friend. I also think about friends as being like tiered. I have like a core group of 3 really close friends, and then like lower tier of maybe 5 or 6, and a lower tier of maybe 10 friends. They're distinguished by how close I feel to them and how close I feel to them on a daily basis.
I guess I classify maybe the closeness of a friend as I gauge it maybe how well I connect with that person on various levels, whether it's emotionally, intellectually. It doesn't have to be someone that I see often, because I have really, really close friends that don't live near me, and when I see them, even if I just see them once a year, I tell them everything and we catch up, and it feels normal, natural, and like no time has passed. So it's hard for me to define what a friend is, but it's a feeling. I mean, Adam and Lowell are definitely 2 of my closest friends. I tell them everything. That is definitely a close friend to me.
When I think of my friends, I think of people who I want to spend time with and who I'm excited to see. Yeah, I think just like Lowell and Luke said, I don't need to see this person all the time, but when I do see them, I'm very excited to see them, and it feels like no time has passed. Yeah, I think it's people that bring you joy in your life are the people I consider my friends.
How's it different from the Polish definition?
What you said actually is not much different from what I would say. I can make friends quite quickly, like if I feel the connection. And lots of people in Poland will almost require themselves to have some amount of years of relationship before calling it friendship. I think after 2 days saying that somebody is your friend is not realistic. Like you still very much don't know each other.
Yeah.
But again, waiting years for it, it's a little bit too long for me.
We're all probably different in that regard. It takes me a really long time to consider someone a friend. I feel like Luke makes friends all the time.
How long is long time?
I feel like I would have to spend a lot of time with someone for at least a year to like think of them as my friend. I feel like both of you though make friends a lot more quickly.
I mean, I feel connected to people really quickly, and I always say like water finds its own level, and I think people who have similar energies, connections, souls connect really quickly. I feel like I can connect with someone really quickly. But I think a friend is someone who it takes a minute. I would say a year, 9 months, some sustained interactions and desire to be around, and time There are people who could be a friend, but I just don't have the time to develop the relationship, maybe. But I would agree, it takes a year to transition from someone who I just met to someone who I would consider a friend.
I think for me, the strength of the connection can like vary the amount of time that it takes for me to make a friend. I mean, it definitely takes some time. It can't be instant, but there are people for me who I feel like I've become really close friends with in the matter of months. Two people that have come to mind are two of my closest friends now who I met maybe a year and a half ago. We met on a bike ride, and within a couple months we were pretty close friends, and then within a year I was speaking at their wedding. And I think part of that is because I connect with them so easily and deeply that the friendship developed really quickly. Probably after like 3 to 6 months, it felt like I had been friends with them for like a year or two. So for me, it varies, and I don't put like a cap on the time. And to a certain extent, I agree with Adam and Lowell, but it's not for me like a super prescriptive thing, because there are people who I develop relationships with very quickly.
What is the favorite way of spending time together for you, and how often that happens?
Most often around food. It's something we do all the time, have to do. I like to cook a lot. We have a kitchen that accommodates sitting and watching and being engaged in cooking. So I would say we most often engage with each other around food as the three of us. Would you guys agree with that?
I would say that you bring us together around food for sure. So definitely I feel like if you're driving a hangout, then it's definitely going to be around for food, because that's like what you love to do. And we love to eat your food.
Otherwise we don't hang out.
Yeah. I think we're always hanging out. I mean, we're always here at this house. We're either in this kitchen all doing something probably different and chatting, or I'm on your bed chatting with you guys like after work. I feel like pretty much almost every day after work, if we're here, we're somewhere chatting or catching up, even if it's like for 20 or 30 minutes. And sometimes it's around food that you cooked.
Yeah, I'm like usually cooking and you guys are chatting.
Yeah.
We also travel a decent amount together. We've been skiing together. We've been camping together. We've been to weddings, a lot of weddings together. We've been at clubbing together. That's a different thing, but also true. We've always enjoyed that, so I think that's a big part of it as well.
So if you remember how many places you lived in and how many roommates more or less you have through your life.
During college, I lived in 3 different houses. They were all with 8 to 15 people, but they were really big houses. It was like a fraternity house. That was kind of the lifestyle.
It's very obvious for you what kind of lifestyle that is.
Yeah.
If it's like in the movies, or movies are mythologizing it and overblowing stuff.
I would say it's more or less like the movies. It's more like the movies than anything else. So I think that's the easiest way to think about it. Yeah, it's like the movies. But since college, I've predominantly lived alone. I lived in a couple different places in San Francisco and New York before Lowell moved in with me. I've pretty much been living alone or with Lowell. I lived in New York for 3 years, and towards the end of my time there, I had a friend move in with me. So I had a roommate for a little bit, but mostly I lived alone. And then I lived with Lowell, who's my husband. So after college, I wasn't really the big roommate house kind of guy.
After college, since 2005, when I left home, I've lived in a different apartment every single year. Always with people, except for, 4 years ago, I lived for 1 year by myself. And then for the past 3 years, I've lived with Adam. But we've moved every single year, except for the past 2 years I've been in this place. So between 2005 and 2018, I moved every single year.
In college, I lived in a different place every year and had the same. Well, the first year I lived with one person, because usually your freshman year you get paired with someone random. And then my second, third, and fourth year I lived with Lowell and 3 of our closest girlfriends at college. After that, I lived for a year in New York with Lowell, but I didn't move when he left. So I lived in the same place in New York for 7 years with Lowell, then a different roommate. And then after that roommate moved out, I started renting that room out on Airbnb. So I sort of had like different roommate every week or a couple days. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I lived in 2 different places with Adam and Lowell. So I've never lived alone. I've mostly lived with 1 or more people. And I think it's a total of 7 apartments.
I don't know if it's necessarily American culture that is, people living with roommates. It's a lot more predominant in cities like San Francisco and New York, where the cost of housing is really, really high. And so people are a lot more willing to live with other people and figure out how to make it work after college so they can save money and in order to live in those cities. Whereas I think in other cities in the country that are less expensive, you probably have a lot more people living alone or living with their significant other more quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And also, I know a lot of people, a measure of success for them is to live in their own place, especially in cities. So a lot of people, even though they are living with other people, and this isn't everyone, some people like communal living. I like living with people. I don't want to live by myself, but I do know some people who, once they are making a certain amount and they've reached a certain place in their career, they're excited about living by themselves. It's either something they've always wanted to do or it's something that they feel like a measure of success.
It's a lot easier to be single and dating people when you live alone, just to hook up with them and not have to worry about your roommates, but also to be able to brag to your significant other. It's sort of like a pride of honor. Yeah. Oh, you have your own place. Yeah, I live alone.
What is the best and what is the worst way of getting roommates?
I always say San Francisco has a way of getting you a roommate. I think it's difficult in the city. I'm literally always saying this. Like every time I turn around, I'm saying this. You know, I've heard stories of like a lot of people who will move here and get a temporary housing situation and then try and find a roommate versus, you know, if you're moving here from New York and trying to find a roommate online or trying to find an apartment online, I feel like it's really difficult. But once you get here, there's always folks, because people move all the time, there are always people who are changing, looking for roommates, moving apartments, getting here, getting a sense of the different neighborhoods and the different friends and different people who are looking for apartments. I think that's the best way, highest chance of finding good housing situation, good roommate. That's how I moved to San Francisco, through a friend of Adam's.
Yeah, I think adding to what Lowell said, especially in San Francisco, the demand for housing is so high that if you happen to have a spot open, it's probably really easy to find a friend or a friend of a friend that needs housing and would be like excited to find someone who's within their social circles to live with, because otherwise you are kind of randomly posting on Craigslist and finding a roommate there, and that's kind of going in blind. But I guess the thing about that is if you do post something on Craigslist, you're probably going to get so many hits because it's so hard to find housing here. You get to interview probably dozens or like hundreds of people. I personally have never lived with anyone that wasn't already a really close friend of mine, so I don't have much experience with that, guys. I've always lived with really close friends.
A lot of people here who have apartments and they're looking for roommates, a lot of times they set up this pretty complex interview process, and they have all of these questions that you have to answer, and you have to interview with all of the people who live in the house. And it can be a really intense process in order to get an apartment, because the people who live in the house, especially if they don't know you, if you're sort of a friend of a friend, they want to interview as many people as possible to make sure they have the right fit who's living with them. But sometimes, a lot of times it works out.
I actually failed 2 of those interviews. 2 of like Adam and Lowell's friends needed roommates, and they interviewed me, and I didn't actually get selected. I think they went with people that they knew better, but I went through that side of things.
Or maybe they just went with people who interviewed better.
that could be it too. Thanks, Lowell.
Besides those mammals that are living here regularly, you have quite some visitors and also neighbors. How many neighbors do you have and how many neighbors do you know?
So we live in a 2-unit building. So we have our unit, and then we have upstairs neighbors who live directly above us. And we actually were friends with them before we moved in. That's actually how we found our apartment, through a mutual friend who knew them and knew us. And so we're actually good friends with them still. And so we go upstairs to their apartment a lot. They come downstairs to our apartment a lot. We have dinner parties together. We share cooking ingredients and appliances, music, alcohol, and do we travel together? I guess. That's it.
So I'll say we have a lot of visitors. You mentioned this, and I think we have a lot of friends between us and our friends upstairs. And this past week, our neighbors upstairs had 2 visitors who were kind of in and out of this place. And so, yeah, we just have, especially on the weekends, just a lot of people coming and going and enjoying the space.
And then we also have next door neighbors on either side of us, which are in separate buildings. But in San Francisco, all the buildings are touching each other. It's, we kind of share walls. We have good friends who live on one side of us, who are another young couple our age who are a lot of fun. But then pretty much everyone else around us hates us. We're a little loud. We stay up late. We get some complaints from our other neighbors. but we all coexist. They all like us. We just have some enemies, but we're dealing with it.
How they communicate with you? It's verbally, by letters. What kind of channels are being used?
That's actually a good question.
How our neighbors communicate with us.
Well, our upstairs neighbors who are friends, we have a Facebook Messenger group chat. Some of us do, where we communicate mostly on that, and it's mostly sending each other jokes and memes, and it's just, normal friend conversation. Our next door neighbors either will text us or sometimes slip notes into our mailbox, or occasionally use Nextdoor, which is a social networking site for neighborhoods, and use that to try to communicate with us if they think we're being loud, or sometimes they'll call the cops on us if they think we're being loud. So we got many forms of communication. All the forms you can think of. We've experienced it.
Do you have some interesting stories about your roommates, those that you are living with now or in the past, and also maybe from somebody else's life? So there is one.
One that comes to mind, which Lowell said that I could tell because he probably doesn't remember it. My memory is better than his. I'm kind of his historian. Lowell really does his own thing and is a very independent, self-driven person who is not going to change himself for other people too much. He's going to be himself no matter where he is. So his freshman year roommate, so Lowell, I think, would often walk around naked or really just do his own thing in the apartment. I don't really remember what else it was, but cut to someone bought his roommate a book called What to Do with Your Naked Loud Roommate or something. He saw this book on his shelf.
And 45 other tales of like the worst freshman year roommate or something.
45 tales of the worst naked roommate that you've ever had or something. But other than that, since I've only lived with best friends, I definitely have some pretty crazy stories of what my roommates and I have done together and like whatever separately. But I don't have
bad roommates.
Yeah, I don't think I have any bad roommate stories. I Airbnb my place out for a year and a half. The worst thing that ever happened was this one guy asked me if one more person could stay in the apartment, and that would make it 3. And I said no, and then he asked me a couple more times, so I finally gave in. He said he'll sleep on the floor or whatever. He ended up sleeping on the couch, and then I said that was fine. I come home, and he's taken over my entire living room. His stuff is everywhere, and it's basically turned into his bedroom. And that's actually super minor, and it wasn't that big a deal. I'm surprised that that's the worst thing that's ever happened, because it was like a small inconvenience and not really anything crazy.
I have a better story than that. So we also have an extra bedroom in this house that we currently live in, the 3 of us. We also rented out on a website similar to Airbnb. We had someone staying with us for 2 nights from Toronto. It was Thursday night. He decided to go to a bar nearby, and Luke was also at that bar. They came home together roughly around the same time, right? Luke came home with someone, though, that he was trying to hook up with. And our guest came over with 2 random people that he had met out and was really loud and drunk. Luke went down to his bedroom with his new friend, whereas our guest was upstairs being really loud and drunk up here. Lowell and I go to bed. It was a Thursday night, so we worked the next day. And the next morning, I come upstairs for breakfast, and I'm making eggs or something, and Luke comes upstairs, and he looks like he's pale as a ghost. And he's like, is our guest still here? And I said, yeah, like what happened? All of our rooms have little balconies off of them. And apparently after Luke had sex with this friend that he had over, he goes to his window to close his blinds, and our guest is standing outside of his window staring at him. This is at like 2 a.m. Luke asks him, can I help you? The guy goes, do you have a drug dealer? And Luke says, what? No. And the guy's like, oh, no, it's fine. Like, I already talked to Adam and Lowell. They said you could give me your drug dealer. And Luke was like, it's 3 a.m. I'm not doing this right now. Like, leave me alone. So Luke closes his blinds. And then I realized when I woke up, I had like 7 missed calls and 20 mixed text messages from our guest asking for drugs. Next morning, I asked him to leave. That was the craziest thing that's happened.
So this is a story about a friend of mine who's in a very unique living situation. He recently moved here from a different country and needed to find affordable housing like everyone else does when they move here. A friend of his found a co-op situation from a house not too far from me. It's actually down the block. The living situation is it's owned by two gay men who are married and own the house, I believe. And I think there must be like 10 or 12 rooms in the house. One of the husbands you must refer to as mama and the other one as papa or dada. My friend, he moved here and I don't think he was like fully aware of what the rules were, but it's a really incredibly strict set of rules. He has to, I think, meditate every morning with his door open so that mama can verify that he's meditating. I think he probably has a curfew. I think maybe I'm making that up because it seems like it'd be right. There's an insane set of rules he has to follow. He has to vacuum the living room 4 days a week. And mama sent him a list of rules. She emails him, he emails him at least daily. And if he doesn't respond within minutes, he texts him and says, have you gotten my email? Why are you ignoring my email? I haven't heard from you. Have you gotten the list of rules I've sent you? So the people in the house, I think, are mostly queer men and women who are a little bit younger or coming from a different country and sort of need like a community and a home. But this sounds like it's this really bizarre utopia where the owners of the house so clearly and desperately want a family and children. And I don't know if they couldn't have it or what, but they've sort of like found this way to create this really weird dystopian household. My friend eventually found after a couple months that the set of rules was just too insane for him to handle. So he's moving out. Mama was insanely offended and it was a whole dramatic situation. I don't remember the details were, but it sounds like a really interesting living situation. I wish I remembered more of the details because they were very salacious.
It's funny. It's like they got their family, but they're also getting paid for it because all those kids are paying rent. We should do that. Daddy, Papa, and Auntie.
And the best one? That was, I would feel, going in the direction of the worst one. And I understand that often best times do not translate into stories very well. It's just nice. Sometimes just a continuous thing that is happening for years and it's very comfortable. So there is no story in the classical sense. You will not make a movie about that. Maybe a very experimental one, but there's no classic story in it. If that's your experience and you know how to put it in words, that would be also nice to have.
They're not roommates, but like Adam was saying, we've had a lot of guests here, and I would say our best guest moments have been two separate couples that we've had and just really like shared really great meals with. One was an old French couple who actually have a bed and breakfast in
France.
Montpellier.
That's not where it was, but sure.
And they were like in their 60s and we're just kind of traveling and we just had a really great, beautiful meal with them. The second was a girl and a guy. The girl was lesbian, the guy was gay. They were best friends. They both just gotten out of really long-term relationships. And so they were coming to the U.S., coming to San Francisco to just kind of like get away. The guy didn't really speak much English, but the girl did. And she was just like so high energy and also really traumatized by her relationship, but also really funny about it. And it was fun to just share that time with her.
We asked her, we're like, so how are you doing? And she was like, absolutely terrible. And then just like keeps drinking and eating her food. So she was a good sport about it, but was obviously going through some trauma.
Yeah.
I think every living situation I've been in has been like incredible. In college, my last 3 years were with Lowell and 3 of our really close girlfriends, and they were my family during college. We had crazy 3 years in college. I mean, we got into all sorts of trouble, but also had a ton of fun. And then living with Lowell in New York, one of my close friends, Chris, maybe 4 years in New York. He was like my family at the time, someone I was super close with. And then now the past 3 years with Adam and Lowell have been just amazing. And yeah, they're like my best friends, my family, my emotional support, people that I enjoy spending time with, doing stuff with. They're my travel buddies. I always tell people I would much rather live with Adam and Lowell than live by myself. I'm not one of those people who is like looking to eventually. They probably hate hearing this. they're cringing. They're gonna have to kick me out basically before I move out. The past 3 years have been good.
Luke also was effectively the best man at our wedding, so he gave a really amazing speech.
That bought him another 2 years.
It was legendary. People still stop him on the street and ask him about it.
I don't. As a young person, I had a guinea pig and a mouse. So far, the death of the guinea pig is the most traumatic one that I ever went through. And also it was like in 2 goes, because first we thought that he will die very soon, and then it didn't happen. And I was really sad during the first time, but when it really happened, I was like vaccinated for that occasion. How many people, because like I met already 2 dog walkers that come here to take Moses. How many are there?
Okay, first of all, rude. Moses has one primary dog walker. However, and she's amazing. She like takes care of him when we travel. She's the best person. She's also 8 months pregnant, and she is having her husband and her sister help fill in for her. She had to go to the emergency room on Monday because, I don't know, something happened, but she's fine. He's had a lot of people come to help take care of him and take him out. He's also crazy. That's Moses.
How many therapists and Chinese language tutors does Moses have?
He only has one trainer named Lowell, who clearly didn't do a well enough job. So the thing about Moses is that he's a very sweet dog, but he attacks every single person that walks up to the door. Whether he's met them before or not, he just tries to eat them and murder them for like 5 seconds, and then he gets over and then he falls in love with them. He's a nice welcome party for every single person that comes in. So that's Moses.
I'm trying to just think about like roommates in general in San Francisco, like if there's anything general we can say about how our friends have roommates. San Francisco housing stock has a lot of large houses, large old houses. It's common to have friends who have 3 or 4 roommates.
There's also like housing communes. So there's old Victorian houses that have 10 to 30 people living in them, and they're not cheap. There's this whole interview process and application process to get in, and it's like you're buying into lifestyle of living with people, and couples live there and married people live there. It's a co-op, yeah, and it's sort of the dream of kind of staying young forever and living with people and surrounding yourself with people. I think San Francisco is unique in that respect, and whereas a lot of other places, you know, this sort of tradition is once you get married, you would move into your own place and have kids. San Francisco, or the Bay Area in general, bucks that trend.
Most common case that I see amongst my friends is that, as they said, they're living in a house with multiple rooms, so maybe 2 to 4 or 5 roommates, and it seems like there's like a revolving door of new roommates that maybe switch out every year or two, and it's usually an acquaintance that they probably know. So I think most of my friends sort of like, they'll have 3 roommates that they kind of know they're acquaintances with, and then maybe one will leave, and a new one will come in that they maybe already know or is a friend of a friend, and that's the most common thing that I've seen. It's almost everyone I know, I think, that has roommates.
Thank you. It was great having you here this week, and I'm glad you met Luke at Vipassana the other week. We're happy to do this.
We mentioned earlier that we think a lot of times part of the reason people in cities live together is because of the like economic pressure. Do you see that happening in Polish cities? Is it already happening? Do you think it will ever happen? How will that affect people if they're forced into living in situations that maybe they're not used to? Because you said most people are.
So first of all, there's this technical difficulty of spaces being smaller. Like I've been to that kind of co-op that you mentioned with 30 people living there, but it's like 3 stories and lots of buildings with high ceilings there that you can put bunk beds. And it's not claustrophobic still. There's lots of space. To have 30 people in one house like that, you have to really search for a space that could accommodate this. And you mentioned earlier the situation of having a house to signify that you are successful. I personally, and from what I read in psychology, think that's a trap. Like you are doing something against your nature and you think that it will bring you happiness, but it will most likely diminish the... So, case of being forced into a situation, if there's time for it, because I don't know how it happened here, because lots of people seem very comfortable about the roommate situation. But also there's lots of talk about gentrification. And rent is crazy high. It's interesting for me if there is no habit of doing that or knowledge. And co-ops sometimes choose name of intentional communities. It's connected with different movements of alternative way of living, which have quite a strong tradition here.
Yes, in the Bay Area specifically. In the 60s and 70s, all these cults and communes and co-living situations were founded here. And so, yeah, people have always wanted to join together and start something that's sort of like the cultural history of San Francisco.
There's also a community of those communities. And if there is a problem to be resolved in one, sometimes somebody from different house will come to be a mediator or somebody who will cast his vote. And that's a heavy vote in institution if people inside cannot find their way. This time of experimentation in 60s and 70s, maybe it was far out, but they created some systems that, if you are a little bit less experimental, will work. If somebody from the generation before fall of communism would have to live with somebody from the other side of the timeline, I think that could be very, very uncomfortable.
Right.
It could make for good television.
6 communists, 6 millennials get together in one house.
I don't know how many people have problems because of gentrification. If there are some San Franciscans for 4 generations and for them it would be a tragedy to move out, or you don't have many situations like that. In Poland you can have people who feel connection with maybe even a building that they or their family lived in for a long time, and that is...
There's definitely a lot of people who've been here for 10, 20, 30 years, and they definitely feel the pressure of the rising rents and how much the city has changed. There is rent control laws here. Housing stock built before 1979, which is a majority of the housing stock here, because there wasn't really much residential construction in the 80s and 90s until really the last 10 years. If you live in a house that was built before 1979, you have rent control. Once you move in, your rent can only go up a certain percent every year. And so there are people who have been living here for 30 years and they're paying, let's say, $800 a month or $300 a month in rent. But if they moved out and that unit was rented new, it would rent for $3,500 a month.
10 times more.
Yeah. For those people, they can't afford to move, and so they have to stay where they are. And even if it's a tiny 1-bedroom apartment and they want to have a family, they have to figure out a way to make it work. And so there's a lot of that pressure.
It's actually opposite of what I was thinking about. You are somehow trapped in the place that you are in.
I mean, a lot of the people who are moving here now work in the technology industry, and they're making a lot more money than the people who have lived here for 20, 30 years. Because the technology industry wasn't really that big 20, 30 years ago. So there was a lot more working class, middle class jobs. A lot of people, they can't afford to move. Once they've been here for 20, 30 years, they have to stay where they are because the rent is too high everywhere else.
That also influences the dynamic of most people I know, the roommate situations that we talked about, where it's sort of like a rotating list of people who live there. Because there's usually one master tenant that either stays in the apartment in actuality or it's on the lease. You'll have one roommate rotate out like at a time instead of everyone leaving and everyone joining, because to maintain that rent controlled status, one person has to maintain the master lease.
The second that the master tenant move out, then the landlord can mark the rent up to market instead of keeping it at the controlled rent. The rent has really gone crazy in the last 8 years. So if someone has a lease from 8 years ago, like they're not going to give it up. And so they will find people or find a way to pass it on to someone else and pass it on to someone else so that people can keep it at that controlled rent rate.
If you can't find somebody to be a master tenant, you look for friends or friends of friends who have living situations that are rent controlled, and then you basically wait for a spot to open up. And that's how a lot of people I know find affordable housing, which is somewhat problematic because I feel like to find affordable housing, it implies you need to have a network of people who live here, which makes it difficult for people who don't already live here or don't have that network of people. So it's kind of a complex issue.
I'm an optimist by nature and also professionally with these laughter workshops. So it sounds like a system which rewards a tradition and community, broader group of friends that can exchange those non-master tenants. It sounds like a very natural solution to a problem of gentrification. What is the biggest change between 10 years ago and now?
And I think the biggest change has been the explosion of Facebook and Google, all the other technology companies that have become some of the most valuable companies in the world. If you look at the number of people that work there for how valuable these companies are, it's a really high value to person ratio. And so that means a lot of these employees who were there from the beginning made insane amounts of money. That's driven up the cost of housing. Simultaneously, California in general has really been bad at building housing. There's there's a term that we call NIMBYism, NIMBYs, not in my backyard. So NIMBY, not in my backyard. So people are really opposed to new housing development and new construction. And so that's also driven up the cost of housing because there's limited supply. I think what you've seen in the last 10 years is first you saw all these tech companies blow up and all this new rich people coming here. So a lot of people got priced out, but I think the good side of that is you've got a lot of people now supporting a lot of new construction in the city, and the city that didn't really add any people for like 20 years. San Francisco didn't really change in size. It kind of just went up and down a lot. Has actually started to grow. Is sort of learning to accommodate the needs of the people.
Yeah, and I just wanted to qualify something earlier that what I described about the rotation of people. I don't think it's a solution by any means to gentrification because everyone is vying for these apartments. The people who need them aren't necessarily getting them. It might be the people who are, I don't know, best connected or have friends who have these things, and isn't necessarily people who need them. So it's the reality of it, but I didn't mean to say that it's like a solution to it. It's just how it is right now.
Someone's solution to it. It's not like the solution to gentrification, but it's like how people are dealing with the situation.
My thinking is besides just amount of money that you have, there's the second metric of how good connections do you have. 2 ways of getting place here. And it's better to have 2 instead of 1.
I could talk for a long time about housing policy.
I have to go to bed, guys.
Yeah.
Are you going to walk the animal? Adam?
I know how to reach all of the 2 balloons that I talked with. If you have questions for them or would like to contact me, write. My email is fishgoat@gmail.com. Goodbye.
Your mouth is so wet.
Yeah, what was that?
Yeah.
Mine's like so tiny. United.
Yeah.
But
And
Hi, Hal.
yeah, what? Who cares?
that was. Yeah. Yes, actually, that's a very good idea for a show of that that would work. Very interesting. Bye. What?
Like it's required.
I think that's so good.
It's a requirement.
I think that's so good.
What's the punishment for not doing
Spanking.
I think like severe guilt trip